Hello, I'm Hickey from interest.co.nz and welcome to a special economic weather report brought to you in association with the BNZ. Today I want to try and explain what's happening in Europe and what it means for New Zealand in the wake of this shock and awe package that we've seen over the last day and what's happened on the markets. On the face of it, it looks like we've escaped Armageddon, that the markets were about to melt down and the European finance ministers and the European Central Bank got their act together at the last minute and came up with a package, about $1 trillion worth, that would rescue the system to avoid contagion and a complete meltdown. Phew, everyone said. We're safe. Well, I beg to differ. Let's look at what's actually changed within the European financial system and what might happen next. And when I say next, I'm not talking tomorrow, I'm talking over the next couple of years. Now, the European Central Bank has announced that it will intervene in bond markets to buy back bonds, particularly bonds for sovereigns in Europe, countries, that are really struggling at the moment to raise money. Now, this includes Greece, Portugal, Spain and Italy, the so-called PEGs. And that debt is held mostly by European banks to the tune of about 500 billion euros. And this was the real problem at the heart of what was happening in the markets in the last couple of weeks. Banks became very nervous about which other banks were holding the toxic sovereign debt, so they wouldn't trade with them, and this raised a real risk in financial markets. So the ECB, the European Central Bank, has jumped in and said, we'll buy all this dodgy debt, this toxic debt, we'll take it off your balance sheets and we'll look after it. We'll pay you real cash for it. But we'll make sure we sterilise that cash so we're not seen to be printing money. Now that means that the European Central Bank will issue high-quality bonds back to the banks once they've got that cash in their hands. This means that it isn't pumped out into the economy and creating inflation. What essentially the European Central Bank and this new fund that's being set up will do is exchange good quality, mostly German debt, for bad quality Southern European debt. That all seems fine. But what it means is that the banks in Europe won't be lending that cash out. They'll be very conservative in the way that they operate. In the same way that currently American banks, and for the last couple of decades, Japanese banks, have not lent. Now, what does this all mean? This means that Europe is not going to be growing very fast anytime soon for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the Germans have said, we're not going to lend you this money unless you crack down on your government spending. And many of them have horrendous budget deficits and very high debt levels. That means they're going to have to slam down the brakes on their economies. So that's not going to get the economies going again. The banks aren't going to be lending again, and therefore European growth is not going to be that fast. It all sounds very Japanese. This is what happened at the end of the 1980s, throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s. Japan had a property boom. The government intervened to stop the banks collapsing and then proceeded to try and grow their way out of it by pumping government money in and eventually, over time, cracking down on some of that spending. Essentially, because the banks were broken, their balance sheets were ruined, they couldn't really get out there and start lending again. You had these, what I call zombie banks. The problem, I think, here is that Europe is repeating the mistakes of not just Japan, but also the United States. It's leaving its zombie banks and that toxic debt in place and hasn't solved the fundamental problems, that there is too much debt inside the European system and that unless you have some sort of solution for that debt, you can't get your economy going again. Now, there are two ways to find a solution for that debt. Firstly, you could restructure the debt. That's essentially where the customer goes to the bank and says, I'm never going to be able to repay this debt. You're going to have to take some of the pain, you're going to have to write down the value of some of that debt and reset the terms of the loan so I can start repaying it again. That's called a restructure, a default and a restructure. Secondly, the European Central Bank, the central bank, could actually start printing money, pumping that money into the system and creating inflation. Now that's just another way of defaulting on your debt. It means that the value of your income, the value of the assets are inflated, leaving the debt down there, and you essentially get out of the problem of too much debt by inflating assets and printing money. But It is a problem for Europe because the Germans will never allow the central bank, the ECB, to go out there and print like there's no tomorrow. It's just not in their DNA. And this big rescue package, this shock and awe package, which seemed to solve the problems of the world overnight, hasn't actually solved the basic problem at the heart of the Europe. I call it a festering sore. And that is the creation of a monetary union without the political and the fiscal union to go with it. So you have the creation of a currency which is being devalued essentially by various governments within that union proceeding to ignore the rules about how much they could run in terms of budget deficits and eventually rely on the strongest in the group to bail out the weakest. And that's what's happened. The Germans have just bailed out the Southern Europeans. They're not happy about it, and they won't allow it to create an ECB which is printing money. So we have a basic problem. A monetary union without a fiscal and political union behind it. A bunch of countries in the euro who really don't want to help out the Southern Europeans. And an inability to either print your way out of the problem or default you out of the problem because the banks are too big and too structurally important for the Germans or the French for that matter to let them go under. So the problems haven't been solved. There's too much debt and there isn't a restructure or a money printing exercise to try and get out of that debt. Meanwhile, what does it mean for New Zealand? Well, with Europe struggling in a Japan-style period of deflation and slow growth for a decade or two, that means we can't rely on Europe to buy our exports. It's reasonably important, about the third largest buyer of our exports. It also means that China, which has been exporting like gangbusters to Europe, may not see so much of that growth. And remember, Australia and New Zealand is dependent on China to a large extent to drive its economy. And of course, the United States depends to an extent on Europe to buy its products. What does this all mean? Well, I think we're still in for several more of these financial crises as economies and governments grapple with this need to restructure or reflate this debt away. It hasn't gone away, unfortunately, even though the markets are celebrating. We may not be celebrating for years, and I fear decades to come. I'm Bernard Hickey. That was a rather long economic weather report, but hopefully explains to you what's happening in Europe and what it means for New Zealand. That was a personal view, but brought to you in association with the BNZ.